Hello, everyone. Thank you for being patient about this lecture. This is these are the things that I want you to think about when you go to write your paper about rent. Okay, so there are a few things that I want you to think about. This is not a paper where you tell me your opinion about this musical. Um, you will get to tell me your opinion at the end of the paper, but this is a true critique. So a lot of people ask, who decided that Picasso's paintings were good, right? Um, whose opinion matters about art? Because we all know that art is subjective. You can never completely go objective about art. And we all know that, and that's true. But there are ways that your opinion matters more. So let's get into what it is that I'm trying to ask you to do. All right, so the first thing is aesthetic valuing and critical thinking. These are the things that I'm going after for with this paper. A critique is not, I didn't like this, or I was offended by this, or I prefer other kinds of theater rather than musicals. That's not what this paper is about. This is a true critique that is in a scholarly manner, talking about a piece of art. So this is an educated evaluation of the aesthetic value of a work of art through critical thinking. Let's talk about what that means. First, aesthetic. So nowadays we talk about aesthetic as sort of like your style or your aura, your look. When we talk about aesthetic in art, we talk about the appreciation of the beauty in a work of art. This beauty does not necessarily mean pretty. Beauty means the lining up of parts to create something meaningful, to create some catharsis. This idea that something is lining up, something becomes apparent in chaos, or something lines up in a way that you weren't expecting, or that has multiple perspectives about it, right? All these pieces work together in a way that is consistent with the principles of the art that you're talking about to create the whole, which gives us a perspective or a feeling. So aesthetic valuing means you're determining the relative artistic or theatrical, as we are thinking about it, success of a piece of art. And this relative artistic success must use both the vocabulary of that discipline and the principles of the art. So there's a reason why we've spent the first month of this class, maybe even a little longer than that, right? Learning about the principles of the art. Because unless you understand what makes art in that media art, your opinion doesn't really matter in the scheme of things as far as educated aesthetic valuing goes. All right, so aesthetic valuing and critical thinking means not asking us to judge a work of art from like an individual response. I didn't like this, or I liked it, or I didn't feel anything, or I felt something. It's talking about the critical thinking that you have to do to observe, to react, to converse, and to write about a work of art that includes evidence-based reasoning, not personal experience and opinion. Now, caveat, obviously, personal opinion can never completely be separated out. Art is subjective. You have a feeling when you watch a piece of theater or you look at a piece of art. That's never going to be able to completely get filtered out, right? That's what art is to make somebody feel something. If you felt a certain way, then that's what the art did to you. But you have to take that idea of catharsis and think about it from different perspectives, not just from your own perspective, right? What are the vocabulary words that we use to talk about this kind of art? What does the craft call for in this kind of art, whatever art in question there is? If you have just a rant of opinion, it's not going to have anything to do with the art in a larger conversation, right? A true aesthetic valuing, a true critique of a piece of art has to take into consideration the larger picture, the entire community of people who are both working in that art form and all the people who are observing this art. Okay. Now, in theater, we have a few ways that writers are actually a part of our community. We have critics and we have reviewers. Okay, those are the two main jobs in theater that involve writing about theater. And even if you are just a reviewer in the New York Times that writes about an opening night of something, you are still steeped in the principles of that art. So anyone who is writing about theater should be a professional writer who are educated in the principles of that art, who are intelligent, who are passionate lovers of the art. I don't want to take anyone's recommendation about whether I go to see a show if I don't know that they love theater, right? Every writer about theater should be able to do some sort of dramatic analysis. So understanding the context of the work that you are doing, the context of the production that is being done in the larger picture, and can also write well in an interesting and engaging way. So our critics are people who write longer critiques. So those are going to be found in books or journals or peer-reviewed websites. The reviewer is going to be, like I said, those people that write smaller articles about maybe one production or one night of a production for newspapers or magazines or websites. Right? So let's talk first about the critic. The critic, sometimes we have reviewers called critics, but when we're making this distinction in this class, we're thinking critic is longer form, reviewer is shorter form. So the critic is the one who has time. They take time to prepare a very carefully written insight about a production and this is for a specific theater audience. Usually the people they are writing for are scholars of theater or for an educational institution or for a journal of the theory of theater, right? They're not usually journalists writing for a popular press, although there are journals and magazines that go in depth that would use more of the critic eye. Most of the time, any review you're going to read about one specific production, even if it's in a longer form, would be considered a review. The critic needs to understand the wide range of plays that this specific production is a part of. They need to be able to understand the literary qualities of this play. They understand the text. They understand the playwright. They understand the history of productions. All of those things come into it. Now, if you're a critic, you are usually one of two kinds of critics. One's going to be the dramatic critic, and they are going to be the ones that write about the play texts. They're concerned mostly with the literary context and quality of a production. They talk about critically analyze the text. They are scholars in all kinds of genres, and they understand authors and playwrights and all the categories of plays that they are critiquing a play against. Mostly concerned with a written text, which means this person is going to understand all of the different ways that this specific text has been represented in productions. And that may come into the critique of it, but it's going to be mostly about the playwright, the script, all of that. Because we said before, in theater, it's not the director's medium, it's the playwright's medium. So it's really important that we have people that are writing about these authors and these playwrights so that when we go to try to be true to the text, to the script as we are doing a production, we have to know all of those things. So someone has to put that idea together so that when we go to do this play, we have all the context we need to know whether or not we are being true to the text, right? The next kind of critic is going to be the performance critic. And this is one of those crossover places where a reviewer is also going to be a performance critic, just in a shorter form and in a more immediate context. A performance critic is going to be writing about productions, but they are going to write in a longer form. So they're preparing their critiques over an amount of time that is much longer than maybe the run of one show. They're going to do rigorous research regarding the play itself, regarding all of the different ways that a particular production has been presented. They're going to go over the decisions made by those writers, the designers, the directors, the whole production team. They're going to think critically and deeper about the form of that specific play, the style, the genre, the character, the action, any other facet of a production, not just whether people will like it. So a reviewer is going to give us that sort of immediate, you should go see this. A critic is just going to tell us about it. And this is where we get the information that would help us form an opinion that is educated, right? They are mostly concerned with the actual watching experience. So we said at the very beginning, reading a play is not a complete experience, right? So what the performance critic is doing is writing about that second stage of understanding a play, right? Where it's actually acted out with a median group of people, of actors, that create the complete experience for reading a play, right? They might look at a particular performer. So they might be a person that puts together all the ways that one particular performer has represented different characters throughout their career. Or they might look at a director. They would write all about how this director created concepts for all the different plays that they have done, right? What are the concepts and what's the vision with this director? They might also look at the design elements, looking at maybe one play. Say we look at To Kill a Mockingbird, which has been done for years and years and years, right? So the performance critic would look at this play, take all of the different important productions that have been done of this play and talk about how the concept changed, how the demographic changed, the people who are watching this play, how the design elements changed, and how that reflected what was happening in society at the time. That's kind of what this performance critic is going to try to do. It's going to be a wider context than just, should you go see this play? And this is so important because we know that if we take the definition of theater into being a time of space being shared by live people, we know that when that is done, it's done. There's a death of sorts at the closing of any show. Each night, it's a little death. Each production, at the end of a production, there's sort of a death to it, right? Live theater is fleeting. And unless you were in the room at the time, you don't always really know what the experience was. So a critic is going to serve as the memory of a production. They're going to compile images. They're going to have detailed descriptions for future revivals or for a remounting of the same play or just for posterity in general. And this is where a new playwright might come to these performance critics' writings and do some research on how something had been done before so that they can improve upon it or change it enough to stay true to the text, but also be relevant to whatever audience they're trying to perform for. All right, so now the reviewer. So the reviewer is going to be that sort of cheerleader or safety officer, depending on what production they see, to drive people to see the show or to warn people about what they're about to see, right? So these writers are going to be a little more entertaining. They're going to understand how to write for a modern audience because they're not writing for posterity. They're writing for the people immediately who might go see this show, right? It's important that a reviewer gives that warning to people if they know that the community at large is going to have to think a certain way, or is going to have to stay open to something, or they may have to say, we need this production to stop. One example of that is going to be Superman. There was a musical Superman that was only on Broadway for a matter of weeks, I think, because every single night somebody was getting hurt, right? There was literal safety issues happening in that theater for the people who were working in that theater. So the reviewer's job was really important to say, listen, don't come see this play because people are getting hurt over and over again. You are feeding the business part of this show, and you are complicit if you're going to go see this show and pay money to see the show and people are getting hurt over and over again. So it was important that that reviewer said those sort of negative things, right? On the other hand, a reviewer who is overly negative about everything they see, you start to think, do they really love theater, right? So a reviewer really has to ride a line, a specific balance between understanding the things that should be railed against and things that should be given credit for. A reviewer should always be educated in the art form, but they are going to be more subjective, right? They are entertaining the ideal spectator. They have their finger on the pulse of that wider theater-going community so that they understand the kinds of people who are probably going to go see this show and act as proxy for the ideal person in that audience and whether or not they're going to like it, whether or not it's going to be successful in creating that catharsis for the ideal theater goer. Now, because this is part of pop culture and it's part of an immediate entertainment part of all of it, they are going to lean into the colorful stuff, right? They're going to make a splash about an actor who maybe isn't that great, or are going to rave about somebody that might be surprising to everyone, right? Because the more entertaining that review is, the more clicks they get, and they are part of that media that's out there right now, trying to get immediate people in and out of the theater. Usually they limit their review to 500 words, maybe 1,500 words, really at the longest, because they are trying to be immediate, right? They're not giving an exhaustive account of the text and the history and all of the other productions that have been done. It is an immediate first-person reaction, serving as the proxy for the ideal spectator for that production. So, what are you going to be doing in this class? You are going to be actually a scholarly reviewer. So we are going to combine those two ideas of critic and reviewer and put it into sort of its own pocket. You're going to be a reviewer. You're only going to talk about one specific movie, one specific production of the same musical, okay? But you're going to use that critical thinking. You're going to use the vocabulary of the craft, and you're going to use an educated eye when you're talking about the performance that you're watching, okay? This should be at least 5 paragraphs in length. It may be more than that. If you are staying true to the specificity that I'm going to be asking you, it's probably going to be more than that. If you want an A, it should be 3 to 5 pages, double spaced, 12-point font. Okay. Yes. All right. So first paragraph, the who, what, when, where, and why of it all. So we're thinking that first paragraph is going to tell me who was the director of the movie, who was the director of the Broadway show, what year were they done, the Broadway show, what theater was that being performed in, where was it being performed, and what was the story being told there. All of those sort of dates, times, names that are important to know. Okay. The next is going to be a plot synopsis, or a review of the storyline. So this is just going to recount the elements of the sequence of events. Okay. And only the ones that are vital to understanding the whole concept of the play. So this is going to be thinking about writing like you're writing a book report, right? Or the back of the book where you get that summary where it doesn't tell you everything. It just gives you an idea of the world that we are living in and kind of what happens in the story. So that when we talk about moments, like I'm going to ask for in a minute, we understand the context for those moments. All right, the third, maybe the fourth and the fifth, depending on what it is you took the most notes on. This part of the paper is going to be talking about the acting, directing, and choreography. So you're going to highlight strengths and weaknesses of maybe the entire ensemble or specific performances. If you know that that specific performer really kind of got you, right? You can write about that and exactly specifically the moments that touched you most and what about those moments made that successful, right? Or or talking about the director's concept. Okay, so you're talking about what the director was in charge of on the movie versus what they had to think about in the play and how were they successful. So I would, if I was thinking about directors, I would think in the movie, the director really had to think about location, right? Because in a movie, you don't just want it all be done on one sound stage, right? You want to make it interesting in the ways that we cut back and forth to things. So I may talk about one moment where the director decided that a person was walking down a street rather than making that person walk into a building. They spent too much time outside rather than in the building, so that when he came into the building, I hadn't quite grasped where he was going until that moment, and it took me out of it. I'm just talking off the top of my head here, right? But I'm talking about a specific thing that the director had to choose a moment for and talking about why it was successful or wasn't. When I'm thinking about the directing of a Broadway show, I am going to be thinking they have one space to work with. What were the decisions they made that were successful or unsuccessful in helping to delineate space and time, right? They only have one real space. How did they create different spaces on this stage, and was that successful? On the Broadway show, we have the voicemails being done by a person at a microphone higher up from where everyone else is performing, right? So there's this delineation of space and time created by levels, right? That person is up on that platform. They are also creating a space where it's just a microphone. They're not doing a lot of movement or acting. So we get this feeling that they're in this box, in this voicemail box, right? And I would say that I felt that made a successful delineation of time and space by allowing the other actors on the rest of the stage to move around, be dynamic, and those people were in one spot in sort of this box, and it made sense that they were in a voicemail, right? You can also talk about the choreography. The choreography is very different in the movie than it is in the play, right? There's a whole lot more choreography in the movie, hint, hint, than there is on the stage. Why do you think that is? Do you think that that was successful? And why, right? And also thinking, when you're thinking about these two media, they're different principles, right? Remember when we watched those split things where we watched one thing on the movie, one thing on the show, and we talked about why something that would have been done in Broadway wouldn't have translated to movies, right? Because if they sang at the top of their lungs the entire time into a close-up, into a microphone, it would have felt really overwhelming in a movie theater. Whereas on the stage, if you aren't that projecting of your voice or your face or your body language, it's not going to come across to the audience. So when you're talking about things that are successful or unsuccessful, you have to take into consideration the principles of each of those media, right? All right, so paragraph 4 or maybe 5, 6, 7, you're reflecting on the design elements. So this is where we're talking about specific moments of light, sound, set, costumes. Okay. Were there ways that the costumes represented a character's feeling by using a texture in the costume or in the color that they used for that specific character all the way through? How did a specific costume give you clues about the character or about the time period or the socioeconomic status of the person who's wearing it? And how was that successful in the movie versus the Broadway show? I will also say, hint, hint, there were some things that were exactly the same when it came to costume that were on the stage and in the movie. So you may feel like that was the perfect thing to keep the same, right? That worked both on the stage and in the movie, and that they were right to do that, to stay true to that original design, right? Or you may decide you wish that one character had been translated to the other in the same way, right? Because you felt like it didn't represent that person's personality in the movie, whereas it did on the stage. Okay. Maybe there are some things that you felt like you missed. Maybe something wasn't obvious enough in the play that when you watch the movie, it all of a sudden made sense. And this is why, right? So you also remember, you have to think about that specific genre, that media. In movies, you have a whole lot more budget, you have a whole lot more up close kinds of ideas, whereas in the play, the budget is going to be very different. The audience themselves are going to see these costumes in a different way than we would on the movie screen, right? So think about those limitations and the impact that execution might have. But make sure that whatever you talk about, it is specific. I want you to talk about the specific blue that Mimi wore for Out Tonight on the Broadway stage versus the specific black skirt that was used in the movie. Okay? I don't want to hear the costumes did this and that and the other. I want to know which costume. I want to know which character. I want to know which moment, which scene, and what is that serving in that specific moment, specific scene, specific character. Okay? Don't give me a wash of anything in this paper. I want to know specifically the moment that you're talking about. Okay? And then finally, your last paragraph, or maybe a couple of paragraphs, is you're finally going to be able to give me your opinion. Okay? So, a very last paragraph or so, you're going to give me your final evaluation. Tell me what it is that you are filtering through, right? Because we all know we're all going to have a bit of a bias. Art is subjective. So at this point, you're going to give me the context of what it is you're seeing all this through. So if you didn't like it, that's fine. You can say that, but I want you to support it with a reason why. If you can't give me a reason, I don't really need to know. Okay. If you liked something, tell me why. What did it make you feel? What did it make you realize? What made you confused about that specific thing? Okay. Even in this paragraph or these couple paragraphs at the end, you must incorporate the vocabulary and the educated evaluation based on the principles of the art of your likes and dislikes. Okay. We've done a lot of talk about what it takes to create successful art, successful theater. Even in this paragraph or a couple paragraphs, I want you to use that vocabulary. Okay. And then leave us with a recommendation. Would you recommend that someone see the movie first and then watch the play? Do you think that the play is more appropriate for theater goers, whereas the movie might be more attractive to people who have never seen the show before? But tell me why. Okay. So you're going to recommend why or why not. All right. So that's the overview of what I want to see in this paper. There are a couple things that I want you try to steer clear from. First, censorship. You cannot object to the content. Okay, so maybe you didn't like watching the drug use. That has no real bearing on the success of the actual production, because we are all serving the script. There's nothing about that script that a director can change. Okay, so objecting to the content has no bearing in this context. Okay, that's you can feel that if you want to, you can be offended by it, and it's okay to warn people in your last paragraph, like a reviewer, that there is drug use, that there is some strong language or themes. That's fine to do, but just to overly talk about what offended you or what you didn't like doesn't really have anything to do with what we're doing here. Second, excessive cheerleading. So it's rare that if you're really looking at it with different perspective, as sort of like you take different glasses, and I put on my choreographer's glasses when I'm watching this movie, that I'm not going to see something that I think that could have been more clear, right? Or something that could have been less chaotic or messy. Every production has something that someone is going to miss, or that is going to feel not perfect. Okay. Every production has a weakness, or at the very least, a near miss. Okay. You're not going to be engaged every second. Okay. I'll report on all of that. I want to know where it is that things got confusing. I want to know why you felt like that red that they used for that character was chosen. Okay. You'll lose your respect of the passionate reader if you don't look at it from different perspectives. Okay. But also, just as you shouldn't be excessively positive, you shouldn't be overly negative. Something has to be good about it. Otherwise, we wouldn't have millions of people who have wanted to come and watch this play, or to listen to the music, or to watch the movie, right? So don't just start an unjust war with the pen. Okay. Half of that success of a production lies with the audience member. We've talked about that. If you go into to see a show and you decide to text the whole time, and then you come out and say, I didn't like it, that's not true, right? Because you didn't actually engage. So if you have actually engaged with both of these versions of this play, you're going to find something that you thought was good. So put that in there. The last one is, actually, there are two more. The last one, or these last two, is I don't want to hear you talk about these productions as if you knew more than the director and the actors and the producers knew, right? No matter how much you know about theater, there were parts of this that you weren't on that design team. So don't act like you knew better than them, okay? Just talk about your perspective and how it was not successful for you. And I also don't want to know what you would have done instead, okay? We're not talking about your production of this. We're talking about this director's decisions, this producer's decisions, this actor's decisions. It's not helpful or useful to potential viewers to know how you would have done it. But if you do end up being in a production of Rent, or directing a production of Rent, then I would be happy to come and see what it is that you have in your head. Okay. But in this situation, we are talking about these specific productions and whether or not that was successful for you as a spectator. Okay. So now that you know what it is I'm looking for in this paper, make sure that you are taking good notes as you're watching, so that when you go to write about it, you have those specific moments that you're talking about. Okay, that's the biggest thing I'm going to be looking for. Specific moments that you are taking into perspective from different angles. Don't give me a wash about the costumes did this, the lights did this, the set did this. I want to know specific scene, specific set, piece, the specific way that the actor interacted with it. Okay? Awesome. All right. I will see you at the next class. And I can't wait to see what it is you think about this piece of art. All right, I'll talk soon.